Hey, Mark from Builder here. In this lesson, I'm going to walk you through how to process data on each row inside of a grid and then loop through those until you're finished with all the rows in the grid. There's several ways to approach this depending on what you're looking to do, but everything we're going to do is actually going to be happening based on an action performed by the user in the UI. So they'll have to be in the browser to do that. So let's take a look at the quick setup that I put together here. So I have this first page on the left. It's just a list. There's one field for entering a name, an item name, a button to create a record, another button that runs an action on each row that's being displayed, and then another button just to refresh the rows on the page itself. On the row page, I have the data bound here to the item name, just the item name field, and then I created a status field for setting a status. That's the data that we're going to modify on each one. So if I look at the flows on the row, there's this flow called set status done, and it does a couple of things. The first thing it does is it's going to set the value of this to say in progress. Then it will run an update record, so it's going to go update the current record with a status of done. And then it's just going to run the page binding again for this page. So on that local page, in that row, it'll run the page binding again, which will go and get the new data, which it doesn't need to get it from the database because we just updated it so it's local in the cache, but it does the same thing. So it'll update that value to say done once it's complete. So when I click this button, it's going to do that on each row that's being displayed. So let's go take a look at the preview. So I've already created a bunch of rows and done this several times. One thing to note is I set this list just for the demo purposes. If I go back to the grid and we look at the properties, I set it down here in rows to display to just display 5 rows at a time. And that's so we can see some of them being processed and the next set being processed after that. But you can set it to however you want, load all the rows. I would be confident and comfortable doing this on like 1,000 rows at a time or something like that. But it depends on what you're doing inside of each row. If you're doing a lot of processing, running a bunch of API calls or something like that, you may not want to do that on 1,000 things all at once. You might want to loop through, make sure those finish, and then do the next set. Just totally depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to do big batches, or if the user needs to see the process as it goes and confirm something on each row, you might have it actually stop halfway through. So this setup will let you do any of those things. So first thing is I can come in here and just create another row. So I'm just going to type 100, hit enter, and I've set this up to where when I hit enter, it creates another row and then it removes the value from the field. So I can just type another one, 103, 104, 105. So that's how I can just create some rows. They start off not processed, they have an item name. And then when I click this button, run action on rows, what it's going to do is run that action across all of them. So you could see it actually, if you looked real quick, it did in progress and then done. The update record is going to be pretty fast, so you won't see it too much. So I'll just hit refresh rows, run it again, in progress, and then done. So one other thing to note here, what I did was I filtered this grid as well. So they're disappearing from the grid because I have a not filter on the collection that makes up the data of the grid. So it's not status equals done. So show me everything where the status does not equal done. So that means that every time you run this, it goes to done on all 5 of these rows because those are the ones that are displayed. I hit refresh and it's showing me the ones that are not displayed. So I could, for instance, like click this button, show more, so now I've got more rows than that. Hit run action, it's going to run it on all of them that are being displayed there. So like I said, there's a lot of different ways you could go about this. Like you might want to show done and then have a button where the user verifies it. For instance, if it's like an accounting process or something and you're wanting them to go through that process and verify that everything's been completed, you can do that. The other thing to note here, this flow that I set up on set status done that's being run on each row, this can be anything you want. So inside of here, you could do an API call, go get some data, then use that data to update the record. You could literally do anything you'd like to do in here. So it's really open-ended how you want to process it. If you wanted to go a little bit further with this, you could also automatically refresh the list at the end and then have the user click the button to run it again. Or you could actually force a loop on this until they're all finished. And the way you would do that, on this run button, that's going to run across all of these. At the very end, if at the end here you nest the page binding in so that it's going to run the page binding before it runs the action on the page. What that would do when you go, when you click run action, that's going to run here on this, on the flow. It'll run the set status done. And then at the very end, I'm actually going to run an action back up on the list page, the home page. We're going to run it again, run flows on grid. So what that's going to do is loop through all of them, and it'll just keep going until it's done. So let's create some here because there's none left in this list because we just did a bunch. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and go 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. All right, so now we've got 15 records in there, but I'm only going to show 5 at a time. So I'll click run action on rows. It does all those, and it just runs through each one till it's done, and it just finished all of them. So you can do it that way too, and it'll just sit there and loop until it's finished. And now it's done. There's nothing left to do. It finished all the rows, and it's complete. So those are different ways to do this. Lots of different options on this one. You can go into a lot of depth in different ways, but you can automate it. You can have breaks in between to where it only processes what's visible, and then they step through on each piece, however you need to process your records.